Good morning, Chairman. We're now live.
Good morning and welcome to this Highways and Transport Scrutiny Committee meeting. My name is Councillor Alex Hall and I'm the Vice Chairman of this committee. In absence of Chairman Councillor Mike Brooks, I'll be assuming Chairman duties for this meeting only. Can I remind you that the audio-visual feed of this formal public meeting is being broadcasted live via the County Council's website, and with this in mind, I would like to welcome members of the public and press watching this live. I would like to begin with a health and safety announcement. There is no fire drill planned this morning. In the event of the fire alarm sounding, we need to leave the council chamber through the rear doors and leave the building through the reception into the front car park. We then need to wait in the car park until further instructions are issued. Can I remind everyone to ensure their mobiles, laptops and iPads are on silent for the duration of this meeting? And I'll remind you that the hearing loop is now activated. Requests to speak will be collated by the Scrutiny Officer, Chiara. When invited to speak, you should press the button on your microphone unit to make it live, and then press it again when you finish your contribution. We will now move on to the formal agenda. Apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Yes, we have apologies from Councillor Mrs Austin and we have Councillor Ashley Morris replacing Councillor Brooks for this meeting only.
Thank you. Do any members wish to declare any interest that has not been declared previously in their pecuniary interest forms? Seeing none. So, minutes of the meeting held on 21st of January 2023. This item is to approve and sign the minutes of the last meeting as a correct record. Please turn to pages 5 to 10 of the agenda pack. Do I have a proposer? Thank you. A seconder? Thank you. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. Those against? Any abstentions? Thank you. Thank you. Those minutes are agreed as a correct and accurate record. Item 4, announcements by the Chairman, Executive Councillors and Lead Officers. We have a lighter agenda today with one pre-decision scrutiny report to consider and debate. Nevertheless, may I ask officers presenting reports to summarise key points and may I remind all members the importance of succinct questions and concise contributions. Do we have any announcements by Councillor Richard Davis, Executive Councillor for Highways, Transport and IT, or Councillor Cleo Perroton-Williams? No. Okay, thank you. Any announcements by officers? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Just apologies from Karen Kassar. She hasn't got a Teams link to this message, so is it possible for her to be sent the Teams link so she can join? She just sent me a text message.
Okay, thank you for letting me know. I'm sure that we'll get that sorted out. Is there anything else by officers?
No announcements, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. So, moving on to item 5, Lincolnshire Enhanced Partnership Plan and Scheme for Buses. This pre-decision scrutiny report is on pages 11 to 104 of the agenda pack. The Executive Council for Highways, Transport and IT will make a decision on this matter between the 27th and the 31st of March 2023. The report seeks approval of the Lincolnshire Enhanced Partnership Plan and Enhanced Partnership Scheme for Buses following the completion of the operator objection window and statutory consultation. Our actions, the committee is invited to consider and comment on the report and agree to pass our comments to the Executive Councillor ahead of their consideration and decision between the 27th and the 31st of March 2023. The report will be introduced by Helen Reed, the Senior Projects Officer, Transport Services, and we will take questions after the report briefing. Over to you, Helen.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to give a bit more context about the enhanced plan and scheme, members of this committee will be aware that we've referenced those documents through our regular update reports, and it all stems from the Bus Back Better announcements back in March 2021, which requested local authorities to consider whether they go down the franchising route or development of enhanced plan and scheme, and ourselves as a local transport authority, along with probably about 99% of other local transport authorities, decided to go down the enhanced plan and scheme format for developing our asks with bus operators, and setting out future projects and future activity. So the enhanced plan and scheme sets out a with bus operators through an enhanced partnership. They're all statutory, so they have the remnants in the Transport Act 2000 and subsequent Transport Acts amends and so forth about the requirements for that. So it follows a very strict due process, if you like, and we have followed that through and complied with the guidance. So during December, we consulted with bus operators, which is called an operator objection window. There were no objections to the documents, and then therefore in January we also did a statutory consultation focusing on key stakeholders as identified in the guidance, such as Transport Focus and the Competition and Markets Authority. We consulted with all the district councils and our neighbouring authorities to add to that, and then we also had a presence on Let's Talk Lincolnshire. So this builds on from the very extensive public engagement we carried out in the summer of 2021 as part of the development of the Bus Service Improvement Plan, which set out our shop window, if you like, of asks if we were fortunate to get Department for Transport funding in the future. So we have a wealth of information now about what passengers and non-passengers in Lincolnshire would like to see in bus services in the future. So we've captured all that data. This consultation is focused on the two questions around do you agree and disagree with the contents in the document based on the fact of where Lincolnshire is right now? As it says in the report, we were unfortunate not to get the first round of funding for the Bus Service Improvement Plan, so there's no huge aspirations. Everything in there is contained within existing resources between both us and the bus operators. And also in the second document, the first document, Enhanced Plan, and Annex 2, on the request of the Department for Transport, we've set out three schemes we would like to pursue if we were successful with any future funding pots for whatever source they come through. So that focuses on bus driver training with Sporting Boston College, and I can report that Boston College are starting that programme this month with HGV drivers and PSV drivers with funding they secured from the LEP. So if we were to secure more funding, that would mean we could work with them to get more public service vehicle drivers trained. We'd like to work with them on passenger assistance going forward on our education travel offer, and so on and so forth around selling transport as a career. So there's endless possibilities there. We'd like to look at market town development and focusing first on the first tranche would be Boston, Grantham and Gainsborough for a variety of reasons. And also the third project would be bus cycle interchanges. So Bourne, I'll give you Bourne as the example. The bus service to lanes go straight through the centre of Bourne, and as it's growing and the estates get wider and wider, what we could do is to encourage people to travel to a bus stop. The bus operators are quite reluctant to meander through a number of new estates. People like to get from A to B as quick as they can, so we try and keep those interconnect routes along those corridors. But if you could cycle perhaps to the bus stop and leave it securely, it might encourage you. So schemes like that, if we were to be successful in funding. So what we're hoping to do is make the plan and scheme by the end of the month, and then we will be working with the bus operators through the statutory enhanced partnership to work on monitoring and evaluating said plan, report back to you in due course through our standard reports, and continue our Department for Transport relationship, which we speak and engage with them very regularly, and hopefully secure funding in the future, but to continue doing what we can do. Thank you, Chairman. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chairman. Helen, can I just challenge that point on leaving your bike secured? I mean, the reality of somebody cycling to a bus stop, fair enough cycling, but the fact of leaving it secured, I've got a relatively cheap bike that only cost me about 500 quid compared to what some people are riding. Unless the facilities where somebody can actually secure a cycle, where somebody's not going to come along and cut the lock off or cut the wheel and leave most of it because the rest of it is such high value, then that is totally unrealistic. So I'm just challenging that, because it sounds great on paper to say just cycle and leave your bike secured, but what's the reality of that actually happening?
Okay, duly noted, thank you. Yeah, I'll take that back, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Two things. First one, 2/3 of the local transport authorities didn't receive the funding. Did the funding go then in a certain area, or was it spread out in other, across the country? And the second one is the priorities on page 28, paragraph 4.15. I agree with all these, but when, are they going to be put in practice? Because the bus service at the minute that operates in Lincolnshire isn't really a service. It's just, what the companies want to deliver, and that's it. That's the end of it. When are the late night buses going to be introduced? Because like I said at a previous meeting, it's no good you getting on a bus to somewhere, I don't know, for instance, let's just say like Bassingham or whatever, and then you find out when you get there, there's no bus back. Thank you.
Just in terms of, I think it was back in September we reported on which authorities had received funding and which authorities hadn't. Just to give you, in East Midlands, Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire and Nottingham City and Derbyshire City received funding. Nobody else did a pocket in North East Lincolnshire, and there's a focus, I think, on the sort of urban areas, Greater Manchester, places like that. The West Combined Authority received a lot of funding, etc., etc. So a lot of the county shires lost out in this round. But I can the map was reported some months ago, so I can send you that if you'd like to have a more look at that. In terms of just in terms of bus services at the moment, the Department for Transport's announced extended funding to bus operators for bus recovery till the end of June, and they've also extended the £2 adult single fare cap scheme for those participating bus operators to the end of June. So they're continuing to try and support and stabilise the bus network. We're still in the recovery phase, and as I've reported previously, bus pass holders have not returned anywhere near to what pre-COVID levels are, never mind, and they were declining before that date. So the priority at the moment is stabilising the current bus market, and as you know, I think you're referring to Lincoln probably as in what you were saying. It's run as a mostly commercial service, so if Stagecoach see an opportunity, they will run more services. So our focus is on that standard offer during the day and supporting bus operators to keep the market as stable as we can. And enhancements, I'm afraid, I think are for the future, if we can get people back onto using the bus. So that's why we're trying to explore different ways if the ENCTS pass holders do not return. I'm just going to check what you've referenced to in 4.5. Bear with me. Is it the plan or the scheme? Oh, page 28. Okay, yeah. Yeah, that they came out largely through the consultation back in 2021. People want low fares, they want frequent services, they want reliable services, and they want better evening services rather than morning services. So that's some of the information that came out from what people want. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Vernon.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a number of points and questions to ask, so I hope that's okay. But I'm going to refer to the large page numbers because I know there are a couple of different ones. So on page 16, it mentions how there's no organisations whatsoever representing pastures in Lincolnshire. So that's sort of, can we encourage something like that to be set up? I think that's quite important. Page 25 refer to consulting with the passenger groups, but obviously we don't have any. So as I say, that could be something that should be set up. Page 26, recovering bus patronage to pre-COVID levels from April 23. What steps are we undertaking at the moment to ensure that's going? Because obviously we're only a month away from that at this stage. Page 27, punctuality being 71%. I'm surprised that that's not reflected in the priorities on page 28, and I would have thought that that would be something improving punctuality, which would be sort of pretty fundamental. On page 35, we talk about a lack of nighttime and Sunday economy. This is always a tricky one because for me, what comes first? If you've got transport going into an area in the evenings and on Sundays, it sort of signifies that they are open. So is there more work to be done with local businesses to ensure that sort of buses can sort of provide a sustainable and long-term service with that, whilst also having businesses open? Page 42, I think absolutely hit the mark with that one. New development, new families. If you can try and pick people up from the start rather than encouraging them to try and change methods once they've already moved into an area, I think that would be brilliant. And then I'm fascinated to see that the traffic is up 60.5% since 1993. I think that's just a really interesting fact, actually, that's useful to see. We talk about increasing value for money on page 56. And in so many ways, I don't think it's necessarily about the price. It's about improving the infrastructure of bus stops and whatnot. And I noted that with the audit of bus infrastructure that you referred to earlier in the work, hopefully that will sort of increase the general consensus of value for money rather than just cost. I love the plan for Call Connect, increasing the hours of operation on page 63, possibility of Sunday services. And I think, is there scope there to increase it to sort of operate on an ad hoc basis for local events, something like Burley Horse Trials? If there was a bus running that day, I'm sure would sort of absolutely reap dividends for the provider. And then finally, sort of page 87, the Freedom Never Gets Old campaign has obviously just finished, and I just wondered how successful that had been over the last sort of time that it's been running. Super. Thank you very much. Thank you for your indulgence. Thank you.
That's fine. Passenger groups, you're absolutely right. I think the Gainsborough and Brigg rail line has tried to straddle into the bus market, but it is primarily focused around that community rail partnership. So that's something we need to develop and need to grow that. Whether we can make groups or whether we can do it in a bit more innovative way, we haven't worked that through yet, but that's something we've got to do. And we've engaging very strongly with Transport Focus, who are kind of the umbrella organisation for engaging with bus passengers and being the voice of bus passengers nationally and regionally. So they're taking us every step of the way. So I'm comfortable that we will see an improved engagement going forward. So I'm just going through punctuality. Absolutely, Traffic Commissioner take punctuality very seriously. In the traffic light priorities, we've done 7 junctions in Grantham now. Spalding's the next stop. Things like that all improve punctuality, but bus operators take that very seriously because they can be held accountable to the Traffic Commissioner if there's persistent punctuality issues. So it improved during COVID, as you would expect. And there's hotspots, so they come to us with hotspots, and that's partly why the enhanced partnership has been really good. They come to us. We've got the technology now in terms of traffic light priorities. I'm sure some of my highway colleagues will support that view. There's no infrastructure needed on the highway. Do it all by computer, and people don't notice that, but it can make such a difference in certain key areas. The bus is running late, goes to green, that sort of thing, and you can set all your parameters how you want to do that. So that is really one cost-effective, cheap way of improving that. But you're absolutely right. Punctuality is probably incidental. It's probably not explicit enough in the document, but I'll take that on any future redrafts. Yeah, lack of nighttime weekend economy. There's very few services in Lincolnshire that are above the standard areas. new development, new families, we're working with the big developers about their travel plans and making them more robust, and working through the Section 106 agreements insofar as we can to secure bus infrastructure rather than trying to retrofit that later. It's very frustrating when the new development, and then we get requests from people who moved there for a bus stop, and they could have done all that, you know. So that's something we're looking at. We do that anyway, but I'm sure that we could do that in a more robust way. So Burley Hall, TCL, who provide, and any other operator for that matter, they can do private work as well. They can do 20% of their work privately. So they have worked with operators. They do one private school, that sort of thing. So that's always an opportunity. And it'll be, but if there's a demand, so I'll take that back about the Burley and other events.
I'd just add, not just Burley, that was just the first
Yeah,
event
give
that
you
sort
an
of front of mind,
example.
but it could be a real way of cutting traffic congestion going into these events to have that service operating on those event days.
Right, okay, then I'll feed that back. Have I answered all your questions to you?
Just about the freedom gets old,
Oh, yes.
never gets old, not gets old,
Yeah.
freedom never gets old, yeah. And how successful that's been, and I
Right,
realise
so-
it's only just ended.
Okay, so the Department for Transport took a great interest in that came. So we officially ended in January, and it saw an increase in people applying for bus passes, but it hasn't translated into movement yet, I'm afraid, from the initial findings, but we do need to do more analysis from that. But what's interesting is speaking to my colleagues who run the Call Connect service, for example, their passenger numbers on the ENCTS passes are back to pre-COVID levels, and in southwest of Lincolnshire, where they've got the Via app, it's actually increased. So there's pockets where we've targeted and marketed, and the app has certainly made a difference with Call Connect. So they're the sort of development areas that we're looking to move forward with.
Thank you very much for those answers. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dyer.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Helen, as well, for those answers. Just in respect to the £2 scheme that the government's rolled out, how's that impacted take-up of new customers to the bus service? You mentioned in your report, and it's detailed as well, that we haven't returned to bus pass levels, haven't returned to pre-COVID levels, so they get free transport, or free to the end user anyway. So people paying for the service, has that impacted take up at all in any way, and are we monitoring that? In respect to the Boston College training, and I've seen in the report as well, I think that you put the bid in for 2.2 million between 2023 and 2026. How many individuals are you expecting to be trained with that funding? And just a constraint with that, because I assume that course is wholly based at Boston College, is it? How do we ensure that there's take-up of drivers wanting to train who live in Gainsborough, Lincoln, Stamford, etc., who don't live 2 minutes away from Boston?
Okay.
Sorry, there's a few more. And then Councillor Vernon mentioned it as well, and it's something that I'm keen on seeing the results of, the bus shelter audit that's being carried out. My question's around obligations over non-LCC bus shelters. So across Lincolnshire, as in Waddington, I know the parish council maintains a number of bus shelters, but you see in the city of Lincoln, city council bus shelters that are all smashed to pieces, and they refuse to spend any money on those shelters. So what obligations are we going to, what I'm trying to say really, are we going to put pressure on organisations such as the City Council who don't spend a penny on bus shelters? Because I think it goes against what we're trying to do as a county council if they're not maintaining their assets. And I don't think we should let organisations get away with it, especially if we're trying to increase bus usage. And Lincoln, really, compared to the rest of Lincolnshire, should be the easiest place to get people on buses, because it's urban, and bus services are far more reliable and frequent in Lincoln than they are anywhere else across Lincolnshire. Within the report, in 5.6.3, you detail the amount of revenue the City Council get through car parking, and you go on to mention how that supports local public services. And just to quote from the report, this and the required behavioural changes makes using car park reduction as a demand management tool for increasing bus usage challenging. blah, 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 blah. The reason I mention that, and it's just a concern, we can see what's being rolled out in London, and I'm definitely against it. It's the ULEZ scheme. Could potentially we see a scenario where the city council say to the county council, well, hold on a minute, you want less people using our car parks and getting on buses, so we want to penalise motorists by rolling out a ULEZ scheme in Lincoln. That would be something that I'd certainly be against, Chairman. I'm sure many residents in Lincoln would be, but I'm just concerned that this might lead to requests like that from the city council. And in respect again, and I get what you've just mentioned about traffic light priority, and I think that's good to roll that out where we can. But I know that you're also looking at rolling out bus lanes. When you do that, will it be presented to members the impact that will have on motorists? With it, in Lincoln, for instance, there's an aspiration that Broadgate would have a bus lane. I'd be keen to know how that would impact motorists trying to get in and out of Lincoln. And finally, Chairman, you'll be pleased to know, the Bus Passenger Charter, Appendix A, there's quite a few bullet points there, but one of them is reliability of services, which I know I've mentioned before in committee. What is it like now on the ground in Lincoln in respect to bus services? I haven't seen any data. Are Stagecoach, who are the primary operator in Lincoln, has the reliability of their service, has that got to a more acceptable level, or are they still underperforming? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Dyer. If I can work through all the comments and comment where I can. The £2 fare cap, it's the national scheme, so operators work directly with the Department for Transport to submit their data, and they get the reimbursement direct from the Department for Transport. So anecdotal information from the conversations we had with the DFT and others, I think, has seen an uplift in passengers using it, especially for some long journeys. I mean, you get from Lincoln to Grantham at the moment for £2 single fare. I mean, I think that's an attractive offer. So I haven't seen anything yet, but hopefully we'll see something soon. But yeah, second-hand information suggests that it has increased passenger numbers, and they will be fare-paying passengers, of course. So, and that's something we want to grow going forward. So it sounds like if they're extending the scheme to June for now, maybe even extending it further, it sounds like it's not been a disastrous scheme, so I would suspect it's been rather successful. But of course, it's only successful for the operators who participated in said scheme. So not every operator has, which in Lincolnshire we've got a patchwork offer of people, operators who have and operators who haven't. So that causes other issues. Boston College training, that I think the 2.3 million initially was a chucking everything in the kitchen sink. So to do passenger assistance, to do mechanical, a whole wealth of schemes. So Boston's got funding from the LEP to get something started. I think their targets are around 34 drivers per year to be passed, ready to go into the market. And I think it's 30 for the following year. So it sounds like it's a 2-year programme. I've got something in my mind that Lincoln College might be doing something similar, but I think working with Boston, it was setting the prototype for how it could work, and I'd love to see it at all the colleges across Lincolnshire, Grimsby and everywhere, because then you get a full spectrum of drivers and trying to keep them in Lincoln. So what we're doing, so County Council, we do the badging check for any drivers who are doing educational travel projects, so we're getting that up advanced before they even start the course, but for the first cohorts from week 1. So there's those barriers where you have to be a fit and proper person to do our education travel contracts, which is quite right. It's doing that up front and earlier so they can get working as soon as they qualify, basically. So that's things we can do to support that process without any additional funding. So you mentioned the bus shelter audit. So phase 1 of the audit's been completed, and I think we've got something around 6,000 pieces of infrastructure in Lincolnshire. So that's stops and shelters. And phase 2 is underway about establishing ownership, because that might sound straightforward, but it's not as easy as you think. There's various shelters around Lincolnshire where nobody is attributing that they manage and own that. So that's we want to get that definitive list correct and right and once and for all. And you're quite right. So in certain areas, the parishes may maintain the shelters to varying degrees. Some are better than others, and some look after them to the nth degree. Are absolutely fabulous. Districts, Boston and Lincoln manage the shelters within the city boundaries. So Clear Channel have got a lot of shelters in the city centre and maintain and look after them well. We do report all through Fix My Streets, all our requests for bus shelter repairs, because we sort of like signpost that, pass them on, do what we can, but that's maybe something to take forward as a council, engaging with other councils about whether they could do more for the assets they own. So that's something, I've noted your comments, Councillor Dyer. You've talked about car parking as well. It's just that we're putting in in the enhanced plan and scheme issues around that link between car parking and bus usage, which operators, you know, and it's an age-old battle between the two tiers and so on and so forth. So we've referenced it in there, but there's no further plans. Traffic light priority you've talked about. Bus lanes, very few places in Lincolnshire would support a bus lane. We're not urban. We haven't got big road space. We haven't got strategies for diverting cars from other things. So I think it's referenced in there because that's something that was in the original guidance to work through a number of things, but there's no plan for bus lanes going forward. I think our focus is on that integrated transport, getting as many educational travel scholars onto the existing market, on the existing network as we can, that supports that network through the off-peak journey times, and that's the focus of our strategy going forward, and to stabilise that daytime market, and then hopefully if we can get people back on the bus, we can look up to the future. Okay.
Thank you.
And reliability, you're absolutely right.
Thank you. Councillor Ashton.
Thank you. Very pleased to hear the answer that you've just given in respect of bus lanes. But I would like a degree of reassurance that the same applies to bus priority at traffic lights, given that we need to make sure that this is not at a significant cost to other road users, appreciating that in a lot of places the traffic light systems that we have seem to be finely tuned to allow the maximum passage of traffic at peak times, and in some places such as Boston they appear to operate in sequence to maximise traffic flows. And I would just like a reassurance that by introducing bus priority that it isn't going to have unintended consequences on that kind of sequencing and on other road users. And I completely endorse the point that Councillor Dyer was making in respect of bus lanes. I know we're not talking about actually doing these at this point, but should at a point in the future we decide to do so, I would encourage a really serious look at this. Again, with reference to Boston, very best of intentions in putting in a cycle lane in South Square has resulted in precious few cyclists but gridlock through the middle of the marketplace at certain times of the day. So we absolutely need to make sure that we've got our priorities balanced on that. Very pleased too to pick up to hear mention of Bourne, and I think that focuses the question that I have got is, how does this plan facilitate the development of new services or extending existing services in areas where, as I note in the southwest of the county, it is practically a bus desert? Between Bourne and Sleaford there's no connection, between Bourne and Grantham there's no connection, between Bourne and Spalding there are no connections, and recognising that these are significant centres of population. You can get from Bourne to Stamford, or you can get from Bourne to Peterborough, but that's quite a significant little market town down there that has no connections to three of its significant neighbours by bus. And while I hear the Coal Connect setup down there has been particularly successful, I don't feel that that is a substitute for being able to travel up the A15 from Bourne to Sleaford on a proper bus, or from Bourne to Spalding. So I'd be really interested to know how the plan that we've got in front of us would facilitate and encourage the development of those services with any degree, any hope, any prospect of success in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm no technical expert on bus priority measures, but I do think there's certain circumstances that have to be met for it to change to green. So just because the bus, I think it's a bit more complex than that. So perhaps my highway colleagues might be able to provide a bit more of an answer. Jonathan, did you?
Yeah, happy to comment on that. Obviously, I used to work in that team a long time ago, but the priority system at the moment, we've got sort of data-driven analysis, which is sort of a scoot system that is looking, as you say, it links to a phased number of signals, but until you get sort of dedicated bus lanes, you're sort of not prioritising anything. So I think it's to sort of suit the question that was asked sort of thing. It's just, at the moment, they're maximising the throughput of any vehicle type, and that's where we are in Lincolnshire. And we're always capturing that data and looking to improve it. So the more data and more modelling that we get in our urban centres, that's what we're focused on. But at the moment, until you sort of get a prioritised bus lane, it's not prioritising it over any other vehicle type.
Thank you. I think Verity Druce would like to come in on Teams, so if I would like to invite her to speak, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up the point regarding the lack of services in some areas of the county. As Helen has alluded to in the report, we're looking at undertaking a full network review across the county. And I think that these are the areas that we want to focus on, looking at where are there gaps in service, where is there perhaps services that we could look to shift, which services are commercial, which ones are called connect, and where are there gaps where we might need to fill some of those areas. So I think Helen was saying that we're looking to move scholars onto services as much as we possibly can and away from some of the transport that's put in place by schools, because obviously that takes away from that commercial network. But we are certainly looking, as part of that network review, to look at those gaps and see whether there's any solutions we can fill them with.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chairman. Although my questions just got more intriguing now. It's to go over two previous points, to be honest with you. And I don't know whether Jonathan will be able to answer what I was going to ask Ellen. It's reported to me by the school bus service for Sleaford that the Holdingham roundabout doesn't sequence them at all, and is in fact causing a bit of an issue. So I don't know what the technical side of that is and whether it's anything that can be resolved. But I would appreciate knowing, because they report that as being a bit of a blocker, and they have to come through Newark with their buses as well. But the question I've got for Helen is back to page 35 again, and back to the evening services and Sunday services, is that when I've asked at this committee previously with regards to the fact that we've been let down from Sleaford by the rail people, that the rail improvements never arrived that we were promised, and part of that was meant to be nighttime economy and Sunday. And I mean, you know, it would be a very strange argument to me to say that Sleaford hasn't got a nighttime economy, and people want to get to Lincoln to benefit from that economy. Now, when I asked previously, I was told that we were looking at post-COVID recovery, because I said where we've got daytime services that aren't being used, why can't we switch them? Because if they're not being used, why do we keep banging the drum if they're never going to be profitable for the operator? And why can't we look at nighttime economy services? And now Verity's just talked about switching services where there's gaps. So is it a possibility to actually look now at nighttime economy in the areas where they have got one, because people are desperate to not use the cars and to actually benefit from the nighttime economy, but they can't. And if anybody wants to, you know, I wouldn't exactly call Sleaford, Ruskington, Metheringham as outlying small villages or small populations, and yet they've got no connectivity through to Lincoln after a certain time of night. Certainly not one where you can actually go out and spend an evening.
Can I invite Verity Druce to speak? Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's absolutely something we need to take away and do as part of the network review, definitely, because we do need to do a lot of analysis on passenger numbers. And I think you're right that those services have to be maximised. If they're not being used, not being maximised, then we enter into negotiations with the commercial operators to work through, is there a better use of that resource? And I do think the nighttime economy is something we will look at as part of the network review.
Thank you. Councillor Ashley Morris.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's just a couple of points, and I do apologise for missing the beginning of your report, which actually I found really encouraging, which isn't a word bandied about often in this chamber, I don't think. Couple of things. The £2 fare, does that run over to Call Connect as well, or is that still subject to? No. So, a couple of things. School transport was mentioned, and where I actually live, there's a huge amount of money spent on taxis running children, in my opinion, 200 yards to a sort of another taxi and whatever. And it strikes me that the Call Connect buses, being the shape, size and that they are, could really very, very profitably be used in that direction. I don't know, I'm sure some are, but certainly where we are isn't. And there's a vast amount of money spent on sort of getting people's children to school. Night bus, certainly for Boston, where where my division is, would be invaluable because there's a huge amount of nightlife in Boston, and it isn't served by any sort of public transport apart from taxis. And you mentioned market towns. Is there, I believe, when I came back in, is there anything sort of, because obviously we're a market town, and the bus services are okay. There's been vast negotiations about the routes, and with no success at all. That's Bry Lane that we have, I'm sure you're aware. And that has been quite a bone of contention with the market. I don't know if there's any further information on that, but that's just what I wanted to ask. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I invite Verity Drews to speak again? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the school transport, we are looking at widening Call Connect, and we do use Call Connect services quite a lot, more than we used to for educational travel provision. We have a lot of complexities though, in terms of a lot of the taxis are not just the geographic nature of the county that we're having to put taxis or minibuses in place because there's no services. It's also the requirements of the children. As I'm sure you appreciate, we have transporting a lot of SEN children, also those with behavioural complexities. So often the taxis are a requirement as part of their needs. So we're not able to necessarily transport those children on Call Connect vehicles and services, unfortunately. But it is something we are working much more closely with Call Connect service on, to where we can maximise those resources and try and make the services as cost effective for educational travel as we are under increasing budget pressures on that service. The Night Economy point, I think we've covered that we will pick that up as part of the network review. And then I was going to ask Helen if she had any comments on the market town, specifically around Bry Lane negotiations.
As far as Bry Lane changed the timetable in December, so they do a new route through the town, and as it's primarily commercial, with some support from the local transport authority, discussions continue about Boston and where people want to go. Obviously, the Boston Transport Strategy Board, they have opinions about where they'd like to see services go. So they're just ongoing discussions. So I don't know if you was aware they'd done a new timetable and they pick up more services now since December. I can share that with you after the meeting if you... Yep, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Warlands.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too would like to apologise for coming in mid-presentation. Thank you, Helen, for all the information you've given us on Verity. It's been very informative. Just picking up, in essence, of comments that my colleagues have made. In terms of the bus routes in rural areas, we often find that the providers can be somewhat inflexible when local communities would like some adjustments to those, based often on anecdotal but quite rigorous evidence in terms of people's conversations with parish councils, etc. And it can be quite difficult to get the providers, I'm thinking about Stagecoach here, to actually be a bit more flexible on those, particularly in the area that I represent. Anecdotally, we're seeing quite a few of the buses actually not anywhere near full, barely populated with any passengers at all. Thank you.
Shall we share some more detail after the meeting, and then because we're meeting them on Friday, so we can take you out. Just the only mitigation I think for bus operators is that they love clock facing timetables, and you might think, oh yeah, no, it's only take you a couple of minutes to go down there, and then it absolutely wrecks the time. That tends to be their general defence as to why they don't change as much as you will. But we'll talk more. Okay.
Thank you. Verity Druce.
Yes, I just wanted to follow up on that point, in that we do, as you'll probably be aware, we're undertaking a full transformation programme across transport services. And one of the areas we really want to focus on is that engagement with operators at both the strategic and an operational level. So as Helen says, we're meeting with Stagecoach on Friday, which is one of a series of strategic relationship meetings we have throughout the year. So certainly if councillors have specific concerns about areas, then if they can come to us and we can use those meetings to engage and work to influence with the operators and work together to create the correct network that we need.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. A positive out of this report is Call Connect. It's well used. The only hiccup with it is booking in advance, where you probably got booked 1-2 days in advance. But now I've just heard that Call Connect might be used for other functions. So how are they going to keep up with the current demand?
If I can start, and hopefully Verity will follow me. Just to say, Core Connect, you can book up to an hour before you need the journey, so you don't need to book 1 or 2 days. And obviously, the earlier you book, the more guarantee you've got of the journey. And like I say, I know people say some people don't like that, but there's more and more usage. The apps have really made a big impact in the trial areas of Gainsborough and the southwest of Lincolnshire. So Verity, didn't know if you wanted to come back around demand for Core Connect.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so we're continually looking at making sure we don't oversubscribe routes with scholars, because obviously very mindful that there needs to be a balance of available spaces for the general public as well as scholars. So for us, it's a constant balance, working with the operators to understand who's using the service at what times, so that we can try and create that balance.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for your questions and comments. This now concludes the discussion of this item. And moving on to the proposal, I move that the committee endorses the report on Lincolnshire Enhanced Partnership Plan and Scheme for Buses, and request that our comments from the discussion as captured are shared with the Executive Councillor for their consideration ahead of taking a decision between the 27th to the 31st of March. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Dyer, thank you. All those in favour, please raise your hand. I think that's everybody, isn't it? Thank you, everyone. Moving on to item 6 of the agenda, the Road Safety Partnership Annual Update. The scrutiny report is on pages 105 to 146 of the agenda pack. This report seeks to provide committee members with an update on fatal and killed serious injury casualty figures for Lincolnshire, and further the report provides data on trends, comparisons and areas of priority. In terms of our actions as a committee, we are invited to consider and comment on the detail of the report and highlight any recommendations or further actions required, and to seek assurance on the work being undertaken by the Road Safety Partnership to reduce the number of people killed and injured on our county roads. Steve Batchelor, LRSP Senior Manager, is here with us to present the report. Over to you, Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. I won't go through the report line by line. What I'll try and do is bring out some of the key details in 2 areas. Firstly, in terms of where we are with the data and the number of people being killed and seriously injured, and secondly, with the work that we're doing within the Road Safety Partnership and wider with our partners to try and tackle that issue. Starting on page 12, I'll just highlight a couple of the key elements of the county which contribute to the numbers in which we see some of the key factors. That being that we've got one of the largest road networks in the UK with approximately 8,893 kilometres. That's a very specific approximation, which of course means that there's a lot of road that needs to be maintained, a lot of potential areas for conflict. Traditionally within Lincolnshire, as we know, the economy of the county has been based around agriculture, manufacturing and tourism, particularly along the east coast where we tend to see the highest percentage of people killed and seriously injured. This introduces a range of different road users onto our network, including heavy goods vehicles, caravans and motorcycles, all of which can fall into the vulnerable road user categories. Further, there's a high number of people migrating to Lincolnshire within the age of retirement. Over 65 years old, so that's 22.9% throughout the county on average, but more specifically it rises to 30.4% in East Lindsey, which compares to 17.8% across the UK. In terms of what the data is showing us on page 13, we saw 439 people killed or seriously injured in Lincolnshire in 2022. The positive news is we are seeing a progressive reduction, although relatively minor. So in 2021 it was 453. Going back to 2017 we were at 566. And when you look at some of the tables and go back even further to 2010, 2000 when we first started, we're looking at almost half what we were around the start of 2000 when the Road Safety Partnership came into place. So that's the good news. Bad news is 48 people were killed on the roads last year, and it's clearly an unacceptable level of death for us to be facing year on year. Some of the key elements that we can see within the report are that the majority of people killed and seriously injured on Lincolnshire's roads are on the rural road network. Casualties are predominantly likely to be male, specifically in the fatal category. They are distributed throughout the whole of the county, but the highest percentage, as I mentioned, is in the East Lindsey district. The highest risk groups still remain two-wheel motor vehicle riders, young drivers between the ages of 17 to 24, and mature drivers. The category is over 60. I always make the point that we're not suggesting that anyone over the 60 is necessarily mature. That's how the national statistics define it. What we try and do is break that down a little bit further and look at 60 to 70, 70 plus, and look at the different factors that are likely to have an impact when a collision occurs with somebody in those age ranges. On to page 15, just give you a couple of the details around the fatalities that happened in 2022. I mentioned before that they're predominantly male. This year it was 69% of the fatalities were male, but that's a significant reduction on recent years. Last year it was 82%, and it tends to be around that level. 33% were in the 25 to 59 age range, a massive reduction from 63% in 2021, and 66% were either a driver or a rider, which is significant because pedestrians, pedal cyclists, other vulnerable road users have been creeping up over recent years, so we're pleased to see that it's reducing in those vulnerable categories. One of the big issues this year was 96% of fatal accidents happened on A and B class roads, which is a big increase on previous years. It tends to be much more widely distributed across C class roads and unclassified roads as well. One of the factors I think to note is that it's really difficult for us to make direct comparisons to recent years in terms of the statistics because of the coronavirus pandemic and the different levels of restrictions that were placed on movements. It did mean that either the number of people on the roads were significantly different, or the types of users that were allowed to go on the roads or more likely to use the roads in those circumstances changed quite significantly. Every year, as part of the Strategic Road Safety Partnership Board, they highlight the priorities for the coming year, and at this point in time they remain young drivers, mature drivers, two-wheel motor vehicles, pedal cyclists and pedestrians, because we have been seeing an increase despite the fact that it's more positive this year. And we also like to focus on business users because they take up a lot of the heavy goods vehicles, light goods vehicles and car users as well. With regard to the work that we've been doing over the last year, we break that down into three areas: engineering, enforcement and engagement, education, training and publicity. Starting with engineering, we completed we looked at over 1,000 sites and links and assessed those, refining it down to approximately 50 that required more investigation to look at whether there was any action that could be taken to try and reduce cluster sites where collisions have been happening with a higher frequency than we like. We also completed over 50 road safety audits, working with our highways colleagues, and we've pretty much finished now the delivery of the Department for Transport Safer Roads Fund. The remaining road is the A631 and installation of the average speed camera system around Willingham Woods on that route, and that will be completed in the coming months. Under enforcement, we now have 8 average speed camera systems, 38 static spot speed cameras, and approximately 100 mobile camera sites. We had refined the sites that we operated at with mobile enforcement over recent years, but what we've tried to do in the last 18 months is try and have more of a visible presence at more locations throughout the county. So we've gone back to some of the locations that we'd approved previously but hadn't been visiting for a while, and tried to just make sure that there was a presence to reassure those communities, to also give motorists the idea that they might not just see us in the same limited number of locations that they had done in recent times. We are making a number of upgrades to the fixed cameras in the county, moving from wet film cameras into digital and on occasion into average speed camera systems. And we continue to focus throughout the April to October months on having a specific campaign targeted at motorcycle riders. And I want to be really clear though that that's twofold. The first and the primary action for us is around education and training and supporting people to be safe and courteous riders, as the vast majority are. But equally, where that isn't adhered to and people are law breaking, then we need to make sure that we have a really robust strategy for targeting that and helping people to stay safe on the roads. As we always do, we carry out a number of seasonal education and enforcement campaigns around drink and drug driving within the county, and we work very closely with our roads policing and local policing teams to ensure that their enforcement is highly targeted at the locations with most need. Our Community Speedwatch scheme now has 281 member groups, which is really positive and grows year on year. We also have 91 groups trained to undertake speed monitoring within their communities as well. So there's 508 locations under which that can occur, and over 30,000 warning letters have been sent to motorists since the scheme started in 2018. We also have now a much better way of ensuring that if somebody gets 3 letters from a Community Speedwatch teams throughout the county, that they then get a visit from either a PCSO or a police constable to have a conversation around what clearly seems to be a pattern of behaviour with regards to exceeding the limit within local communities. Operation SNAP started in 2021, and this allows members of the public to submit dashcam footage of alleged offences on the roads to Lincolnshire Police, and we process those within the Road Safety Partnership. In 2022, there was 1,722 submissions from members of the public. When we first started in February 21, we received just over 30. So you can see on average we're up to about 150 to 170 per month now, which is really positive. Of those, 566 have resulted in a notice of intended prosecution being sent out to a motorist, which can lead to a variety of actions on some occasions. It will be no further action required, but it could be fines and points, or going on to a diversionary course and getting some refresher education. In addition, and I believe that we're the only ones that do this, we also sent out a further 514 warning letters. Now, because the police were not on site when those alleged offences were being committed, there is quite a high evidentiary threshold required to ensure that, should it go to court, as somebody has the right to do, that we would be able to ensure that prosecution was likely to be successful. Evidence won't always get that far. Sometimes it won't actually reach the threshold of an offence, but we think it's important on certain occasions to say that wasn't the best. It's not great driving behaviour. It might not meet that threshold, but somebody still needs to have a warning, at least be made clear to them that somebody else felt that your behaviour, your driving was bad enough to go on, submit footage, fill out a witness statement and be prepared to go to court with it. So in essence, over 1,000 people have had some correspondence through the scheme. I also want to make it clear that that we're not looking for just any and every offence. We really want to ensure that this is something where some of the most serious offences that would have otherwise had no action whatsoever are seen to as well. So due care and attention, dangerous driving, reasonable consideration for others, failure to comply with traffic lights and signals, red lights, red crosses, for example, and failing to comply with solid white lines. And as we know, in this county, overtaking on solid white lines has led to a significant number of people being killed and seriously injured over the years. So overall, really pleased and positive around Operation Snap. Finally then, in terms of our education, training and publicity provision throughout 2022, we offered and delivered National Driver Offender Retraining Scheme courses to over 25,000 people in Lincolnshire in 2022, which again is really positive because it gives us the opportunity to engage with people who otherwise would have had no road safety intervention whatsoever. We've restarted the National Bike Safe course within Lincolnshire, operating 6 courses last year. Again, getting back to ensuring that we're helping to train people and not just undertaking enforcement. And we also carried on with our Smart Rider, Observe Rider training, which is a one-on-one and allows further education and advice to motorists. We've also introduced Biker Down within Lincolnshire in 2022. This is being led by our Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue colleagues in the Road Safety and the Fire and Rescue Advocate, who is based at Witham House at the Road Safety Partnership. It aims to equip bikers with the knowledge of how to be a first responder should they attend a scene, and is potentially a really important factor in post-care crash and ensuring that we protect life as much as we possibly can do. This year we will be reintroducing our Mileage for Life course, which is based upon providing education and training to mature drivers. That ceased throughout the coronavirus pandemic because that age group was potentially more at risk. But we've reviewed the scheme and we are redesigning it and bringing it out again in 2023. We have our International Road Safety Award-winning Too Fast, Too Soon theatre production that continues to go into schools, sixth forms, colleges, and we're also rolling that out in a slightly different format to corporate organisations through our training packages and focusing, as I mentioned previously, on business and road users. We continue to manage the school crossing patrol facilities throughout the county, and we undertake a wide range of education and communications in some of the key issues such as drink and drug driving, the Fatal 4 campaign the police undertake, mobile phones, winter driving, seatbelts and child safety, for example. In terms of the school, we continue to have quite an extensive provision, both in primary and secondary, and we are currently in the process of developing teacher-led packages and online resources that mean that we can get more road safety messages and communications into schools at every level. But at a primary level, we focus on pedestrian safety, in-car safety, environmental trials, so getting people out and learning how to work at a young age, also walk in a young age within their communities, cycle helmets, and we also been improving and expanding our junior road safety officer scheme. And at secondary school, it's about that transition from primarily being with caregivers to having that independence on the roads. So we talk about adapting to survive, young passenger awareness. We undertake a really quite exciting road traffic collision investigation where they get to work through, as if they were a collision investigation officer, a real collision that happened in Lincolnshire, and helps them use some of the skills they need in secondary school, but also getting them to focus on safety. We then look at preparing to drive as they get to that age, and then, as I mentioned, Too Fast, Too Soon theatre production, looking at some of the issues facing young road users. We continue to increase the number of annual school deliveries year on year, and will have delivered the most that we have ever done within 2022. The rest of the report just details the finances. Primarily, resources to the Road Safety Partnership are generated when a motorist is detected exceeding the speed limit at a level that would allow them to be referred to a National Driver Offender Retraining course, and if we in Lincolnshire provide it, and that's the vast majority of our money comes from. And I think that's everything, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from committee? Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for that report, Steve. Just 2 or 3 questions, please. Because I see one of your priorities for this year, again, is two-wheel motor vehicle. Now, if you drive the rural roads in Lincolnshire, especially on a Sunday, you're part of the rural tourism economy. If you ride a motorbike, you're a hooligan, as far as most people are concerned. Now, no doubt there are bad riders. I know there are, just like there are bad drivers. But bad riders get a real bad rap because people don't like to see motorcyclists enjoying themselves. Now, as somebody who's 6'1" and sits on a 1250 motorbike, I still frequently have people that either don't see me or assume I've got wings on my bike to get myself out of trouble. So I think there still needs to be a priority on people understanding that motorbikes can't accelerate when most of the time they don't want us to because they want to complain about it. But they expect that we can just get out of trouble at a second's notice and they just pull out because they've got the right because they're in a car. You know, so there are accidents still that cause that way. And of course, you don't have dash cam on a bike. I mean, some people do have helmet cams, but they ruin your helmet, to be honest with you, so you shouldn't be wearing them. So that's one, just a plea that way. The other one is with regards to the speed vans I think do help, even if it's only for a day. If people don't know where they are, it is a deterrent. But I've got, if for instance in Ruskington, I've got the 1188 running right through the middle. It's a red route. We can't have the van because there's nowhere for it to park. So we've now got a successful community speed watch, but that's volunteers having to do the job. And one of the reasons that they really sprung up is because there was no other way of doing it. So is there no way going forward that the partnership can't consider equipment that doesn't need to be in the van? You know, because if it's a van parking that's causing the problem, then it seems ridiculous that, you know, where we know we've got recorded incidents because we know letters have gone out from that speed watch, then there is a need for it. And as I say, it is a red route, but I can't have the wagon at all in Ruskington because there's nowhere for it to park legally. And the other one is just with regards to, I know a lot of the data, you know, action comes from the data and it's focused on KSIs and accident rates, but just a plea for Cranwell, because the route off the A15 through to the camp is a racetrack. They've been trying to get some assistance from the partnership and they haven't done. They're trying to get a community speed watch scheme going. The figures they've got are horrendous for 60 mile an hour journeys going on a 30 mile an hour road. So I just have a plea, please, if I can, that something can be looked at with regards to Cranwell.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, you're absolutely correct in terms of motorcycles, in that I referenced there that we need robust enforcement in a small limited number of situations, and certainly towards the north of the county, around the A631 case to Winningham Woods, etc. There are incidences of unacceptable antisocial behaviour on motorcycles at certain times of the year, but primarily the vast majority of motorcycle riders care passionately about what they do in a way that most car drivers don't. And you know, it's entirely appropriate and right for us to make sure that as much of our time and effort goes on helping to protect motorcycle riders, but also educate other road users about the dangers that they face. Every year we'll have a number of fatal and serious collisions, which will be as a direct result of people pulling out in front of motorcycles when they really should have been able to see them if they were paying enough attention. So a lot of our communications work does focus on that side of it. In terms of the new highway code and the hierarchy of road users, it makes it clear that everybody has a responsibility for those more vulnerable than themselves. And I think that's going to take a time for that thought process to embed throughout the consciousness of road users. But it's certainly fundamental to the work in which we do. So we need to make sure that we help and protect motorcycle riders, and that's why we do so much work on education, on training, now with Biker Down post-crash care as well. So we'll continue to do that. You're absolutely right in terms of speed cams. It's not acceptable that we can find a location that meets the criteria, requires enforcement, and then we're unable to provide it. There's no doubt that the nature of the recording equipment that we have, which relies upon creating video evidence and then processing that as opposed to officer seen and dealt with at the side, is slightly more complex than just having a police constable stood there. But it can be mounted on motorcycles. We just don't have the way in which we can do that at this point in time. But it's something that we've been exploring recently. So I will provide an update to you if we get to the point where we can have a motorcycle, have a rider who can do it appropriately, and then can get the equipment in panniers. That will give us a lot more opportunities to get to locations we've been unable to previously. So I'll provide an update when that happens. I'll take away Cranwell and come back and update you on that one specifically.
Thank you. Councillor Dyer.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Steve, for your thorough report. And it's obviously I suppose it's something that we can never do too much of, making sure that people are safe on our roads, whether they're motorists, pedestrians, cyclists, or even motorcyclists. Within the report, and you mentioned it when you were speaking, the plans to upgrade the speed camera systems from the traditional wet film cameras to the digital cameras. And within the report, it does say that work's going to be carried out in 2023-2024. So just to confirm, is that every single one of those cameras in Lincolnshire are going to be upgraded by the end of end of the next financial years to the digital camera systems. I ask that because there's one in my division on Brant Road, and there's one just further north on Brant Road as well. So I'll be keen to see those upgraded. And it's interesting because you mentioned how many static cameras we have in Lincolnshire, which is 38. And then you also mentioned at the start of your report how many miles of roads we have in Lincolnshire. So I've done it in kilometres, but you get my point. It's one static speed camera for every 234 kilometres of highway. Is that enough? And where does that sit in the national average of highways across the UK? And you've mentioned community speed watch schemes, and again, there's many successful ones across Lincolnshire. And if somebody's caught speeding 3 times, a letter's sent to the motorist. So how many motorists have been caught 3 times by a community speed watch team and then received a letter? I would expect it not to be many in the grand scheme of things, because community speed watchers they're not out and about too often, and the chances of catching the same motorist 3 times speeding, I would say it's very, very unlikely. You can correct me if I'm wrong, and I hope I am wrong. So mobile phone use, you only have to sit in traffic lights, and as cars are passing, sometimes during rush hour, it's every other car. Someone's got a mobile phone, they're texting or whatever. It's not hard to see people on their phone whilst driving. I mean, is there anything really that can be done to stop that? I suppose not really, because the people have got to be caught in the act, haven't they? But that's such a factor to dangerous driving and people not paying attention, especially in traffic. And in Lincoln, most days you can sit in traffic and you can probably count 20 or 30 people from Highcombe into the city centre. And finally, and I may have missed it, and it just occurred to me whilst you were summing up, are dangerous roads a contributing factor to accidents on our highway? You do, on page 130 of our agenda pack, you have put out their contributory factors, table 6. Unless I've missed it, I cannot see dangerous roads. But it may be there, but I can't see that. I mean, I'm sure I've got Meadow Lane in Highcombe in my patch, and there was a bus that went off the road a year or so ago, and I know there was the campaign about that road. How much do our highways actually cause accidents? And when an issue is identified with the roads, how quick are highways at picking that issue up and putting it right? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I would just like to invite Karen Kassar to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know Steve will answer a lot of the other questions. Just wanted to come back to Councillor Dyer in relation to the last question about do our roads contribute to accidents. When I first started 2019, I asked for the 3 years prior road statistics following fatalities. And then also I've kept a monitor over the years to today. And it's not a palatable discussion when we have fatalities, but there was no accident attributed to the condition of the road, which for me as the AD of highways gives me a good overview of the condition of our network. Are we getting it right? Are we targeting the right works? So just wanted to answer that question, because that was one of the information I really wanted to look at and to give me an indication of the network. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Back to you, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So to answer your first question around the camera upgrades, it's been a process for the last 10 years, but we have to wait until we have enough funding to be able to do it. My expectation is this will be completed in the next financial year. Better news for you in terms of Brant Road, in that they should have been done 2 weeks ago, but there was a permitting issue with getting onto the road book and space, and so they'll be attending again. So Brant Road will be done, I would think, within the next 2 to 4 weeks.
Just on that, and I know I've got more questions that need to be asked, but I'm quite annoyed at that. Brant Road in Waddington has just received a massive resurfacing upgrade of the highway and the footpaths, and it looks lovely. I'm quite annoyed that after all of this work, we're now going to rip up part of the highway to fit one of these cameras in. I mean, it's embarrassing, really, and it's a shame that LCC couldn't have perhaps been a bit more coordinated to do this work at the same before the road was resurfaced and the footpath as well, because I assume it will get a little bit messy on the highway. So whilst I'm pleased that's being done, the timing is unfortunate. Thank you, Chairman.
Agreed. The rest of them after Brant Road will, I think, be finished certainly within the next 12 months. There might be some slippage sometimes when it comes to power. That can be an issue. What we try and do is always ensure that the earliest opportunity we provide our highways colleagues with the information as to when we're looking to try and do upgrades. I'm unclear as to the specific issue timing-wise for Brant Road, but I can certainly feed back to you and find out why they wasn't able to happen at the same time. But I would agree that would have been the most sensible approach, there's no doubt about it. In terms of whether or not we've got enough enforcement, of course there is policing by consent and ensuring that things are proportionate. We've always ensured that wherever we've identified a location that meets the criteria for the installation of a fixed camera, that's always proceeded. I don't think there's any location where it would have met the Department for Transport criteria in terms of the number of collisions that had occurred, and we've not installed a camera where it's appropriate. So I would suggest they're probably at the right level. Where we've got more flexibility is around the mobile camera enforcement, because the threshold is slightly lower, and I would say there isn't enough enforcement being done through mobile cameras. There's lots of other areas in the county that we want to expand to, and we're constantly working with communities, getting information from them and ensuring that we respond wherever it's appropriate to do so. So I would like to see that expand over time and have more operators as well. But again, it's funding and trying to pitch that level. But as you highlighted, it's such a large road network, ensuring the level of coverage that makes people think I should really stay careful here today and stay within the speed limits, because there's a good chance I'm going to be caught, is kind of really hard for us to achieve, because it's so big and you can go about your business every day and never actually see anybody. But that's what we're working on and what we're trying to change. Just to clarify, in terms of community speed watch, it's not one letter from the same group, in case it sounded like I was implying that. It could be any CSW group within the county. So if you're caught within 3 times, then you would receive a letter. I've always perceived it as, because the percentage is relatively low, that's positive, because people aren't re-offending in the levels. But it may well be that it's harder for them to catch, because you could drive around and not see them for a while. I do have the figures, I just don't have them with me today, but I'd be happy to provide them going forwards. But it is proportionately. So if somebody's caught once, they receive a letter from Lincolnshire Police. If they get caught a second time, they get another letter from Lincolnshire Police, which is slightly sterner, it's fair to say. And then if they get the third one, that is hand-delivered to their residence for a conversation, as well as the letter as well. So you would expect that to be relatively low in comparison, because they would have had 2 previous ones before, and I'd like to think that would get people changing their behaviour a little bit as well. But I will get you the specific number. In terms of mobile phones, in terms of mobile phones, you're right, it's a huge issue for us, and it's underrepresented in the statistics, because if there's a fatal collision, then there's going to be an in-depth investigation, and every element of that collision is going to be looked at. Anything less than that, for example, if you had a slight crash on the way home today and a police officer attended, they're not going to take your phone away and send it off for investigation. So they might ask, or unless a witness says that they saw you, they might ask if you was on the phone, but reporting that as a guaranteed factor in the collision is probably not going to be anywhere near as high as what we all see with our own eyes, which is that far too many people are doing this day in, day out. And clearly distraction in the vehicle is a huge issue and a huge problem, particularly on our roads where you've got single carriageway, national speed limits of 60 mile an hour in each direction. Sometimes with the big vehicles that we've just spoken, you need to be fully focused on your journey at all times, and anything that's distracting you from that, particularly electronic devices, is completely unacceptable and just presents too high a risk. What can be done about it? Well, every time one of our mobile speed camera vans are out, they are recording video, not all the time. So if you were driving through today and you was in a 30 mile an hour limit and you drove through at 30, that operator might look and follow you through, but it doesn't record anything because there was no offence committed. If, as you were coming through, he believed that you was on the mobile phone, they can press a button, and I say he because we've only got male operators at this time, You can press a button and that shows that whilst it wasn't a speeding offence, that they believe there was another offence. And then when they get back into the office, they will then go back through that video, that section, and they will have a look. And if there's clear evidence, then they will look to put that through the police system. Of course, as you highlighted, being seen by police officers is the other big factor. And at certain points of the year, we will do specific campaigns supported by communications and stuff in the press, where we can set up and have, you know, police officers doing checks at specific locations to try and look directly for mobile phone use. I think a lot of it is around communications as well, and then there's a big piece of work in vehicles which are becoming more and more safe, but they are connecting our lives more and more as well. So how can that be done in a safe way? And I think the legislation changing as well to be more specific about any use of the device as opposed to, you know, being on a call and things like that, it will be helpful long term as well. So there's lots to be done there. I know Karen answered it primarily, but my argument would be that no road's dangerous, it just sits there, it doesn't do anything. If you drive to the conditions, then it really should be safe. And I drove Meadow Lane yesterday. There's no reason why somebody under normal circumstances shouldn't be able to travel down there safely, regardless of who's coming in the other direction. Sometimes it's going to be more difficult, we accept that. So that is a prime example where it's relatively narrow in comparison to some of the others. And it's not very forgiving on the sides. I think there's gullies either side, so dikes either side. A15 is one that's been highlighted recently as well, north of Lincoln, where the bends through the centre is relatively thin. But if people are aware and conscious of that and drive to the conditions, they should be able to negotiate it safely. But the very nature of our network, being large, being rural, with the mixture of types of road users that I've highlighted before, is always inherently going to mean there's a greater degree of risk here than there are in some other areas. And that's one of the reasons it's so hard for us to get these really sustained reductions that we're looking for in death and injury. I think that was all of your points, Councillor.
Thank you. Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Chairman. In 3.8, the table on there, the figures, I presume there's supposed to be dates across the top, unless it's just my iPad playing up. I presume they start 2017, 17, 18, 19. There's a stronger line than 2021. So we're saying on there, I'm just surprised more than anything that the figures in 20 and 21 are not lower. Surely was that not supposed to be 2 years where the roads were supposed to be empty? I'm a little bit shocked to see the figures are relatively similar to the others. Was there any learning points from that? Was there anything COVID-wise? Was there any changes in people's driving habits, or was it the roads were empty and speed was increasing? Maybe I don't know. I guess my next question was going to be similar to Councillor Dyer when he asked about the state of the roads. I'm not a biker, but I must admit when I see some potholes, I do wonder if a biker hit one, what would happen, because the depth of them and a single wheel. I mean, I hit them in a 4x4 and I think something's just fallen off sometimes. Surely somebody on 2 wheels hitting a serious pothole, which we do have some, although I must admit the last couple of years I feel that our road networks are getting better and our pothole fixes seem to be better. But surely a 2-wheel hitting a serious pothole, that's got to be a factor, surely. And if that is the case, East Lindsey being a hotspot, obviously, for tourism and 2-wheel riders, do we focus more in that area to make sure our road networks are the best they can be for the area? And the last point from me, 6.7, it says about the biker down training. Again, I'm not a biker, so maybe that's why I miss it, but I've not seen any advertising. That, to me, looks like good training. You're right, bikers tend to go out. They don't tend to go out on their own. They tend to go out in small groups. And if that training could be pushed or advertised further, are we doing the best we can do to advertise that?
Richard?
I was just hoping I could probably answer Councillor Gibson's second question before I hand over back to Steve. In terms of what we categorise as potential safety defects within the highway, so a pothole being a classic example of one of those, our Highways Infrastructure Asset Management Plan sets that out. And as is done nationally, we do take into account different types of road users within the general policy for what we would determine to be a potential safety defect, so a motorcyclist potentially hitting that defect within the road, which then determines our response to that and the response time to that. And with regards to specific areas, we have, all of our roads have a maintenance hierarchy, which is essentially the way that they are maintained. So that's not only the emergency response or the safety response to defects within that network, but also sort of the prioritisation of maintenance schemes for that. And there are specific roads, especially, for example, like around Cadwell, where there traditionally will be more bike usage, where that definitely is taken into account when we determine the hierarchy of the road and our response to defects within those particular roads. So each of the local highways managers does have the ability to escalate or de-escalate the maintenance hierarchy of a road based on the actual particulars, specifics of that road. So where we do know that there is likely to be an increased number of two-wheeled motorcyclists using that road, it's likely that we'll adjust the way that we respond to any condition issues on that road proportionally. So I thought I'd just, hopefully that kind of addresses the fact that nationally and locally we do take into account that not just the numbers of vehicles using a road, but the types of vehicles that are using in the particular circumstances.
Thank you, Richard. In terms of the specific nature, I guess I should not necessarily walk it back, but the answer I gave before, saying that I don't consider roads to be inherently dangerous, but you have given a really good example there where if you don't know the road well, it's so vitally important that we ensure that it is as well maintained and as safe as we possibly can do, because for certain types of road user who might not be aware, it can be more hazardous than it is to others, and so that's why, as Richard's highlighted, we ensure that those areas are dealt with as effectively as possible. In terms of table 3.8, you're right, there are dates on that. I'm not sure why that hasn't shown through, and it goes from 2017 on the left to 2022 on the right. Yeah, like you, I think I'd have to go back to last year's report where I did look a bit more in detail into the differences throughout COVID, so I'm going from memory a little bit right now. We saw an increase in vulnerable road user death and injury, which was pedal cyclists, pedestrians and child injury, and that's because those modes of transport were more available to most people throughout those periods of time. There were varying levels of people on the roads throughout those periods as well, so as I said, it's very hard to make direct comparisons. When there was less traffic on the roads, you found that traffic was flowing more freely, and traffic was tending to travel faster. And what that meant for our road network is there's more potential conflict as people are trying to emerge from junctions. And so we saw an increase in those types of collisions, which are some of the ones we primarily have anyway. And then when it sort of quietened down, it then moved again, as I said, into those vulnerable road users. So you're absolutely right, they're probably higher than we would have expected, but I think there was enough people out and about at various times that it almost maintained. But what that shows to me is that as the road network usage has pretty much got back to normal over the last year, the fact that we're not only sustaining those levels, but now starting to see reductions is a positive for us as well. With regards to biker down training, because it was launched last year, we only had 2 events in the first instance, so we wouldn't do too much wide advertising for it because we'd be oversubscribed. But what we do when it comes to particular groups like that is we go to pretty much every bike night throughout the county as a road safety partnership, and so we talk directly to those road users and the people that are there and showing an interest, and then we'll get the people to go from those specifically onto the courses. So it's using the resource effectively and targeting it effectively as opposed to wide distribution. But next year we will be advertising it more widely as we go forwards. I think you dealt with the repairs, so that's probably everything. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Councillor Ashton.
Thank you. As with often in council and and beyond, we seem to be at times restricted by what we can afford to do, and I very much imagine that it's exactly the same situation with you folks, that if you had more resource, you could do an awful lot more by way of enforcement. could I suggest, have you considered perhaps working with town and parish councils as to whether there might be a scheme where they could make contribution towards perhaps enhanced enforcement, perhaps in their areas? I appreciate this isn't going to be for everywhere, it isn't going to be for everyone, but I know that where there are some town councils and some larger parish councils that do have the available resource and do sometimes have a keenness and a willingness to make a contribution if there could be a direct benefit to their community. And I appreciate we've got to be very careful not to effectively unfairly disadvantage everywhere else, but if a scheme could be put together whereby parishes or towns could contribute, we might end up with a greater pot overall and a greater resource overall, which actually means you can do a lot more enforcement elsewhere as a consequence. I don't know if that's something that you have thought about or something that you could possibly bring forward. I know in the area that I represent, Sibsey Parish Council, for one example, would be very keen to support that sort of scheme. So I'm not plucking this out of mid-air. It is based on parishes that I'm sure would be very keen to do something if they could represent it to their parish council taxpayers as something of deliverable outcomes.
Thank you, Councillor. It's an interesting thought, and I think it's something I'd probably like to take away and give a bit more thought to before I respond to too comprehensively. But I guess my initial reluctance would be, as you highlighted yourself there, that those with means, in essence, get a degree of enforcement that wouldn't be available to others who don't have the resources available to them. It's how would we ensure that there was a degree of equity throughout the county, and resources, regardless of what level they are, were targeted in the appropriate locations. The other thing that I think comes to mind straight away is that at this point in time, we undertake our enforcement in a proportionate way, which is how the police would expect to do it, and it's done based on risk, both through collisions occurring and also the level of speeding that's inherent to those locations. So going from what we have currently, which is everything that has met the criteria for enforcement due to those two factors, we've then got a huge swathe of other locations where I would say, based on speeding but not a collision history, that they have a speeding problem and action needs to be taken, and it might not have met the criteria, but that would be the next factor. So I would probably be seeking to tackle that part of the problem before then getting to another location where it's purely around perception. Sometimes that marries up to the risk as well, but I know lots of locations, I have lots of correspondence where they have a perception of an issue and a problem and feeling safe, which is incredibly important for us to deal with and try and tackle as well, but that's not the same as there being a specified risk based on the data, which is where we target our enforcement at this point in time. So I said I didn't want to sound slightly dismissive, but they would be the two areas of concern I'd need to, I think about most if we were to look towards some scheme of that nature.
Thank you. I mean, just come back very quickly, roughing it out in my head, you wouldn't need a great many parishes across the whole of Lincolnshire contributing, say, £4,000 or £5,000 before you've got a significant chunk of resource that you could deploy both in support of those parishes, would actually be a deployable resource across the whole of Lincolnshire. If a scheme, I mean, obviously it would take some working out just how it would work, but I think there is a potential for a useful bit of resource there.
Thank you. Councillor Vernon.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to follow on from Councillor Ashton's point, actually, the points that I were going to raise about the parish and town councils actually having more involvement in the education programmes rather than sort of the enforcement side of things. The Mileage for Life preparation to drive young passenger awareness courses, I think those are all areas in which, as a parent, I would very happily support my local parish council in doing that course. And I think sort of sometimes it's perhaps fair to say that some children are not as engaged in school learning, without sort of in any way being derogatory there. And it may be that having sort of a different focus on that event and bringing it into more of a community environment, and certainly sort of it's absolutely something I would make my child go to when she's starting to drive. I think that may be something worth exploring. Ultimately, sort of, I don't think education stops at 18, and perhaps where we can look at that with college-age children and those younger adults who are still living at home, it may just be another way of bringing those into that area as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. That raises two issues for me. The first is around the Road Safety Partnership is, I think, still the only one in the UK where so many of the different parent organisations physically put their staff into one building to work together. And I think the level of activity and engagement that we have is really, really positive. But there are gaps, certainly within the democratic levels within the county. And I think that we can do more and must do more around district councils, parish councils, and as luck would have it, we're currently writing a review of the strategy that we currently have, and it's looking at a pathway from here to 2025, which is when the next strategy starts. And so what we're exploring is how do we make sure that those other institutions and organisations and levels of governance feed in directly, both from the communities but also in terms of how they run and operate their services, to road safety, and how can we assist and support them as well. So that is a wider piece of work that's going to be happening, but it then leads down to a second level, which again is we have a limited resource at the Road Safety Partnership. How do we use the other resources that are out there and share and support the information that we have, the delivery methods that we have, so that they can use them in other forums and extend the impact that we have. We've been doing a lot of work with the Fire and Rescue Service in exactly that, saying those other fire and rescue advocates and the stations that are out there, how can they help to spread the message and educate and make sure that that work is coordinated and joined up. So in terms of both widening out the delivery in other forums that we've not previously used, and ensuring that those other organisations have a voice and a part to play in delivering road safety, are two things that we are actively working on at this time.
Councillor Vernon.
Sorry, just to come back on that as well, I just want to be really clear that that's not just relating to young adults, and actually I think the Mileage for Life scheme has a lot of merit in going down a more community-based route as well. So yeah, thank you, that's really interesting to hear. Thank you.
And I think that's an important clarification, Councillor, because that you've given the one example where we sometimes find it harder to get out and get to the people that really need our help when it comes to some of the older drivers. You know, we work in a county and live in a county that often requires personal travel. We've talked a lot today about transport systems and some of the rural locations. And so they're probably extending their driving careers longer than you find in many other areas of the UK. Well, how can we support them to do that safely? It's a right for them to be able to. And also, how do we identify when it gets to a point where it's no longer safe? And that conversation could be had in a safe and constructive forum as well. And so how do we get out to those communities, speak to those individuals specifically? And I think you're right, that the only way we can do that is by using other levels than ours at the Road Safety Partnership at the centre.
Thank you. I see no further speakers, so I'd like to thank everyone for their questions and comments. This now concludes the discussion of this item, and I move that the report of Lincolnshire Road Safety Partnership be endorsed, that the committee expresses its satisfaction with the activity and service provision reported, and also request that our comments and suggestions made in relation to the updates we received today are taken under consideration by the relevant officers as the executive portfolio holder. Does anyone dissent? No, thank you, that is agreed. Moving on to item 7 of the agenda, Highways Quarter 3 Performance Report from the 1st of October to the 31st of December. This report was circulated as a supplement on the 27th of February 2023. The report sets out the performance of the highway service, including the major highway schemes update, Lincolnshire Highways Performance Report, and Highways Transport Complaints Report. In terms of the actions for this committee, we are invited to consider and comment on the detail of the performance contained in the report and recommend any changes or actions to the executive member for Highways, Transport and IT. Jonathan Evans, Head of Highways, Client and Contractual Management Services, is presenting this report. And before I hand over to you, Jonathan, I would like to thank you and your team that worked on this report at short notice, as the item was initially scheduled for the committee's April meeting. So thank you, and over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. As you outlined, this update is on all aspects of the highway service, including the major schemes and the quarterly performance data of the key contracts. And also, as we're going through, I'll run through some of the strategic highlights relevant to the highway service in general. So we'll start with the major highway schemes update. The authority currently has 3 major schemes that are in progress. I'll start with Grantham Southern Relief Road. Obviously, phase 1 is now complete, and phase 2 was also completed in the quarter 3, with the A1 junction opening on the 20th of December. We've got some minor works to go back to there because of the curing time, the temperatures at the time of some of the signposts, but as soon as we get that road space booking, that'll be returned, but it's functioning as we expected. Phase 3 of the works, the major part of the project, started in April 2021, and its planned completion remains at summer 2025. Obviously, we've outlined some of the challenges, the eastern embankment issues, the redesign, and it's pleased to say that redesign work is now complete, so the progress on site is continuing at pace. Move now to the Spalding Western Relief Road. Again, works commenced on January 2022 with a programme completion date of the end of 2023. Progress on site at the moment is focusing on pile caps and some of the works around the bridge over the railway line there. And those local to the site will have noticed that the new roundabout on Spalding Road is nearing completion. I'll move on to North Highcombe Relief Road. So that's the new road that will link the A15 Lincoln Eastern Bypass with the A46 Western Bypass at Pennell's Roundabout. The current phase of the project is focusing on data acquisition and design. We're just about to go into the second phase of public events, and that's on the 15th, 16th and 17th of March, so I'd encourage members of the public to attend them, and details can be found at the LCC website. Later on in the year, we've got the planning application for North Highcombe Relief Road, and we're planning to submit that by autumn 2023. And again, the planned start date remains at the end of 2025. So more details on the major schemes update, February 2023, can be found in Appendix A. And that report outlines the Lincolnshire Coastal Highway, Levelling Up Fund projects, the A17 Heckington Dual, Grantham Future High Street funds, and Sinsel Bank and Dolphin Lane. I'll move now on to the highways update, the general highways update, looking at the performance report. A copy of the Lincolnshire County Council Highways Performance Report for Quarter 3 can be found in Appendix B. This covers the period from, as you suggest, Chairman, October to December 2022. So the results per contract area are, so for the Highway Works Term Contract Performance Indicators, which is operated by Balfour Beatty, scored 75%. That was a small increase from 73% last quarter. The Professional Services Contract, operated by WSP, scored 75.4%. That was a small increase from 74.6% last quarter. And we got the Traffic Signals Contract, operated by Colas, scored 86%. That was slightly down from last quarter, and I'll outline some of those reasons later on in this report. We've got the Client Performance Indicators, because we as a service monitor ourselves like we do for the external contractors, scored 75%. That was down slightly from 83% last quarter. And then the overarching Key Performance Indicators, which is our strategic sort of objectives, scored 81%, and that was a large increase from last quarter, so I'm pleased to say where we scored 68. So the success of Quarter 3 performance data was holding the scores that were achieved for Quarter 2. The other area of success to note was the continued rise in our Highway Works Performance Indicator 3, which are tasks completed against the timescale, and that's for the reactive service, so our faults and maintenance. And that score has risen from 4 to 7, following a significant package of works during the summer months of 2022 and increased focus on the reactive service. So for specific areas of the service that are below the targeted performance, the following improvement plans are in place. So even though Performance Indicator 3 scored that higher rate, it's still falling below the tendered bid position of 8 out of 10. So the improvement plans are in place for PI3, PI8, which is the street lighting service standard, and PI6, which is quality assessment of works. And the service continues to focus on all aspects of these services. So I'll move now one by one through each of the contracts. So the delivery of the three key highway delivery contracts are now in Quarter 4 of year 3 of the contract, and the link contracts are due for renewal on the 31st of March 2026, with the possibility of extension up to the 31st of March 2032. And I'll be coming back later this year to bring a paper that'll be about how we extend the contracts and the decision making that we've got there to make. I'll move now on to item 2.4, which is the Highway Works Term Contract, Balfour Beatty. I'd like to introduce Alistair Macbeth to the committee. So Alistair is the contract director for the Lincolnshire contract, and he'll be around to take follow-up questions between ourselves here today. So for Q3, it was another busy period with approximately 16,500 faults completed in that time. And that's in Q3, we're normally doing less weather susceptible work, so we're focusing on sort of patching, surfacing schemes, and we're no longer doing the surface dressing program. Data supporting that is found in 2.4. Move now on to some of the challenges improvements for the Highway Works Term Service contract. Over the past 24 months, inflation within the construction sector has caused significant challenge for the highway service, and during that time period, the average cost of a scheme has risen by 23%. Over the past 3 months, the rate of inflation rise has started to reduce, and that's anticipated to level off for the remainder of 2023. So that's, I thought it was worth updating there that it's no longer getting worse, but it's still that pressure that remains from the funding that was there prior to that. So LCC highway funding announced in 2023 budget by the wider council will ensure that the existing service levels can be maintained for the financial year 23-24. Whilst the LCC contribution of funding continues to increase, the Department of Transport highway maintenance block allocation announced in November 2021 remains static and is likely to do so until the 31st of March 2025 under a 3-year settlement. LCC Highways continue to lobby the DFT via regional bodies in relation to this ongoing pressure. And that's the pressure that we're seeing there is the inflation pressures rising on the contract, and ultimately our buying power for that element of funding is remaining static. So during the winter months, LCC anticipate and plan for both the reactive and street lighting service to be placed under additional strain. Obviously this is a busy time of the year for us in dealing with and reacting to faults. Additional resources being introduced to the contract, keeping the number of live jobs in a manageable position, ensures that the service operates in line with our Highways Infrastructure Asset Management Plan. And that's our published policy, obviously. Move now on to item 2.5, which is the Professional Services Contract, WSP. Just wanted to pick out an interesting bit of innovation here. So WSP have introduced a number of innovative solutions to the service. And a good example of this is the trial of use of drones for some of our service structure inspections. So that avoids us putting officers in sort of dangerous situations working above water. We've been using some drones of late with sort of high resolution cameras to capture the detail we need. The biggest challenge for the WSP professional services contract is the recruitment for specialist roles. And that's just generally within the engineering sector. It's proving difficult to attract and retrain in this current climate. Nationally, that's a massive issue. Thankfully, in Lincolnshire, we're not seeing it as bad as some authorities, but some authorities are running at sort of 20% vacancy rates in the sort of hard-to-recruit positions. So LCC and WSP are implementing a number of initiatives to tackle the recruitment challenges and are looking to bring staff based in WSP national offices into the LCC offices to bolster service delivery. And that's our strategy ultimately for that service area. We see the value of having officers together, team members together for 2-3 days a week, and that's to help support those graduates, new starters and apprentices, just to bring them up to speed and make sure they see that wider knowledge sharing for projects that we're working on. Move now on to item 2.6, which is the traffic signals term service contract operated by COLAS. So Q3 scoring was on target to be in line with our recent quarterly performance until the cold snap arrived early December, and this obviously introduced freezing conditions. One of those issues that we saw was some of our push buttons sticking into a constant on cycle, forcing the pedestrian crossing to just continually sort of cycle as if it had been repressed repeatedly. Another issue that we had within the traffic signals contract was we had some 2 serious power outages within Lincoln itself, and that caused multiple signal aspect failures, and one of those created 30 on one occasion. And ultimately that's just a resource trying to react to an emergency situation. We're trying to get to those fault aspects within 2 hours, and it just meant that the performance in that area dropped down to 4 out of 10. Move now on to the traffic signals capital refurbishment programme for Q3. We did some good work at High Street Victoria Road Mablethorpe, High Street Coningsby and High Street Mablethorpe. A lot of high streets done in the quarter. All had a number of issues relating to low-lying utilities. So we work with Balfour Beatty, do the civils element of the work for Colas before they come in and put the signal heads in. Something that we're doing to improve that situation going forward. At larger junctions, we're implementing ground penetrating radar surveys, and that's just to accurately pinpoint some of the potential clashes that we may have prior to going out to site. And it's that investment versus the sort of the risk of those projects progressing as we want on site. So I'll move now on to item number 3, which is our complaints. A copy of the Highways Complaints Quarter 3 report can be found in Appendix C. During Quarter 3, the Highway Service received a total of 19,000 in contacts through Fix My Street, the CSC calls and the CSC emails. LCC received a total of 189 complaints to the Customer Relations team during this period, accounting for less than 1% of all contacts. Of the 189 contacts, 151 entered the formal complaints process, accounting for 80% of these contacts, with the remaining 38 being resolved informally in early resolution. So the number of complaints entering the formal complaints process has decreased by 20% in comparison to previous quarters, so there's some good news there. Move now on to the NHT Public Satisfaction Survey. So this is an annual update. It was last reported in April 2022 to this committee. So the Council has participated in the NHT Public Satisfaction Survey, which is the National Highway and Transportation Survey, since 2008. And this enables LCC to understand the views and preferences of a sample of residents and to compare these against the similar councils. So for the recent survey, 3,300 surveys were issued, and for the Lincolnshire responses, we had 868 received. A copy of the NHT Public Satisfaction Survey is attached in Appendix D, so these are our sort of officer thoughts on the actual NHT report. The overall NHT score is monitored corporately as a service level performance measure. LCC score for 2022 has improved from previous years of 45% up to 46%, showing a slight increase in public satisfaction. Our target of 52% is based on the average percentage of all other authorities based in 2019. And it's worth noting that the national average is now 50%, which shows that whilst we are still behind the national average, our score is improving, whereas nationally scores are decreasing. So whilst we still have a number of improvements to make in this area, it's encouraging that highway maintenance, which is a sub-score of the overall 46%, has increased by 3%. And that comprises the condition of the highway, highway maintenance, street lighting, and highways enforcement. As part of the survey, the participants are asked what is most important to them. For the last 8 years, they have remained static for Lincolnshire, and they are road condition, safer roads, and good pavements. There's been a strong steer to spend more on highway condition, which aligns with our highways infrastructure asset management strategy, and which is obviously targeting to keep our larger road class A, B, C in a steady state condition and improve the unclassified road network. So it seems that we're aligning with the thoughts of the public there. Move now on to just the conclusion, final thoughts. So Lincolnshire Highways team and strategic partners continue to deliver an efficient and effective service during extremely challenging market conditions. Performance reported in Q3 demonstrate that the services continue to improve. The service also continues to pursue further initiatives to tackle the areas of low performance. The committee is asked to consider and comment on the detail of the performance contained in the report and comment and recommend any changes or actions to the executive member of Highways, Transport and IT. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from committee? Councillor Dyer.
Thank you, Chairman. And it's a short one, you'll be pleased to know. First of all, I think it's a real positive to see the complaints data that only 1% of those complaints went via phone. So the bulk of those went through the Fix My Street system, which is fantastic. And that's a testament to your work. And I know Richard Bennick, we spoke about that when I was first elected, the work going on behind the scenes to make Fix My Street easier for people to understand and getting real responses to reports. So that's obviously paying off, and it's great to see that people are continuing to use that to report faults on the highway. So that's fantastic to see. And I've done a Control F to try and find it mentioned in the report, and I can't. traffic regulation orders. Now, if it's not supposed to be recorded within this data, just tell me, but it's not mentioned at all other than once within one commentary within this report. Do we as an authority record performance of the TRO team? If not, why not? And if not, do you think that we should? Because as a councillor, my biggest concern and complaint, actually the roads in my division I'm quite happy with really for the most part, is the time it takes LCC to process TROs. Thank you, Chairman.
Richard.
If I may, I'll address the traffic regulation orders side of things. So previously, no. Hence, it's not part of the report that Jonathan would be provided. However, now that traffic team is under my service area, we've done a lot of work already and are instigating all of the traffic regulation orders that are requested through councillors will be logged in the same way as all of our schemes, essentially, within the Confirm system. That means that from officers having that request on their tablet out on site to do the assessments through to us presenting that in terms of its current status, it's all sort of running from one system now. The work that's ongoing to start in April for the new financial year with Sean Butcher and Jean Gibson for that traffic team is that we will be doing performance management of those schemes. So we'll be looking at the request date through to when the assessment's been completed, and I know in various sessions I've said that we've got an aspiration to have an initial answer back to members within 4 weeks of whether that's going to progress, and then trying to, generally speaking, hit timescales of between 6 months and 12 months for that appearing on the ground. And we've got some work to do with our contractors, with Alistair's team in Balfour Beatty to understand the delivery of the works once that's actually issued. But at every step of the way, on a monthly basis, we'll be looking at how many schemes each officer in that team has, how far they're progressing, and obviously setting targets based on how long we think it should take, just to make sure that there is absolute clarity about the resource we've got, what we think they can deliver realistically, and are we keeping on top of that. And we'll be able to be really transparent with that. So I'd suggest to Jonathan that is probably something we can start incorporating into the performance report. It's not a current contractual performance measure, but I'm happy to do an update around that going forward.
Thank you, Richard. I just wanted to add to Councillor Dyer your question there about it doesn't feature in the sort of performance reporting, the formal 50 PIs that we report on. And I guess it's that, because of that sort of known issue there that obviously you sort of want an improvement on. It does feature as one of the value for money assessments. So as a client team within Highways, we carry out a number of value for money assessments where we run through economic efficiency and effectiveness of each of the internal functions, and that drives its own improvement plan. So whilst it's not a specific one of the 10 client measures, and that's probably because we're talking about 3 or 4 members of staff, as opposed to 250 within the service. So it's how much we focus a PI, and my worry would be if we were to bring that in as a formal PI, we'd be dropping the client measure of somewhere else that's potentially underperforming or maybe we're not focused on. But as Richard suggests, we could easily bring it as part of this discussion as a paragraph, an update on a specific sub-measure, instead of sort of replacing another measure that's driving the improvements elsewhere.
Councillor Dyer.
Yeah, Chairman, thank you, and thank you, Richard and Jonathan, on that. And I think actually from what you've said, could I put forward then that we propose that the committee in future request such an update as has been described moving forward? I don't know if anyone will second that. Hopefully they will.
Councillor Rawlins. Thank you. Yeah, I would just, to be honest, I would like to thank Richard as well for that councillor development briefing that we all had not so long ago. It was incredibly useful, in terms of more knowledge on TROs. It was very useful. So thank you to you and your team for providing us with that. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chairman. One for Richard and one for Jonathan, actually. So if the financing's in for TROs, will that mean the ones that have signed off over 2 years ago and haven't been implemented, will they finally be implemented? Because I'm waiting on one that everybody had forgotten about and it's still not in place.
Yes, to answer that, we have got everything that has not either had a previous rejection, so it's gone through the process, and we've informed that it hasn't been taken forward. We do realise that some of them are been in the system for a long time and haven't even made it through to assessment. So that's the commitment, is to understand, get that backlog of them down. I talked about that in the council.
No, I'm talking about the ones that were signed off and should have been done and haven't been done. So like the 50 mile an hour zone from Holding them all the way through the A15 past Lessingham has not been put in place.
Yeah, that's one that's right at the end of its journey, and that's with a discussion around catching up with, I think there's 56 schemes at the moment that currently with our contractor that we've been discussing about sort of fast tracking to get them on the ground. So hopefully they'll be the quick wins, and then the ones that are in, essentially they broadly go through, you'll request an assessment, the LCC team will do that initial assessment. It will then go to, if it's going forward, there'll be a public consultation. If there's objections, it can go through committee, obviously, to go through Planning and Regulation Committee. Then a job pack's put together by our team and issued to Balfour Beatty to deliver that. So you'll see the stages of the life cycle. But yes, we have already got that discussion around fast tracking those schemes that are currently outstanding, of which the one you specifically mentioned is one of them.
Thank you. Jonathan, can I ask, we've raised this before, or I raised it before, with regards to complaints and satisfaction, that it's great that we have the figures for what we're responsible for, what you're responsible for, but I highlighted the fact that quite often complaints come in about things that are not. So, for instance, at the moment, we have got people putting high-speed internet and wrecking the pavements. It's not, I mean, they're permitted to work, so it should be something that's checked. It's bad enough that they're leaving the pavements in the substandard condition in places where they're rushing and putting almost dry tarmac down that's crumbling. But I've had reasons to contact the company for some damage they did to my property. There was a discussion held where they were aware of all the surfacing, the pavement surfacing work that's going to be going ahead by highways, and I think they consider that basically that's going to be covering up all their defects. So the fact is obviously that surfacing work's been scheduled to take care of the works that should be taken care of, rather than covering up an external contractor's defect work. So is there a way that we ought to be showing where complaints are coming in, because quite often the public's perception is it's just the councils, because it's on the pavement or the road, when the reality it isn't. And it would just be nice to see that, just how many of the complaints are coming in that show where the shipshod work's being done, and we end up getting the blame for it.
Yeah, it is something that we need to drill down on that data for. We have started some work with the complaints team, just trying to differentiate what is, I guess, ultimately the highway service responsibility and what is a sort of carrying out of powers of enforcement, and then what is completely separate to us. And I have started conversations with the team, but it just takes that time to get the data streams separated. But it is something that I think would be beneficial for that report. In terms of the sort of street works and permitting side of things for the fibre installation, we've got a number of our officers are out on the network inspecting any piece of work that isn't done in accordance with the specification, the Hawk spec. We will be requiring them to remedy them in some way. We don't see it correct, as you've highlighted there, that if a scheme is coming along and it is our highways one, we wouldn't look the other way. We'd be looking to either them to correct that or contribute to some sort of settlement in terms of that revisit as part of the highway scheme. So there's probably two aspects to that question, but I will continue to work with the complaints team to make sure that report is, at least that information features, so that the members of the public can see the differentiation.
Thank you. Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Chairman. Spalding Western Relief Road is quite a major issue in my area. It's quite sad to see it summed up in two small paragraphs here. Can I ask, since obviously starting this, costs of everything have gone through the roof. Are we on track to be able to finish what we've started, or are we way off? I see the works are programmed to be completed by the end of 2023. Is that Section 5 in its entirety? I believe I wasn't on any council when this first started. I thought that Sections 1 and 5 were supposed to be started at a similar time, and then house building was supposed to afford Sections 2 and 4. I know some of the house building is starting to go through planning. Are is that Section 106 money enough to cover sections 2 and 4, or is there a massive shortfall, please?
We in terms of how the major schemes feature in the performance report update, we have made a decision this year to separate it out. So you'll be pleased to know that the next update that I bring in terms of the sort of highway maintenance update, Sam Edwards is also going to come with a sort of a report that's focused on the majors, because we do think it needs more conversation. In terms of the schemes, Spalding Western Relief Road will be completed in full, that initial phase 5, and I'm probably best pausing there and reporting back, or asking Sam to report back on those other schemes in terms of funding, and I'm probably not answering that in full for you, but I'd be incorrect for me to state something that's wrong.
Thank you. Councillor Ashton.
Thank you. Just picking up on the Lincolnshire Coastal Highway. It's very interesting to see the comments there in respect of Horncastle. I think one of the things that perhaps need to be borne in mind with Lincolnshire Coastal Highway is if we currently remove the occasional seasonal tailbacks at Horncastle and at Ragby, without doing something with the roads around Skegness and the coast, instead of having half an hour tailback at Horncastle and half an hour tailback at Ragby, you'll end up with an hour and a half tailback at Skegness, simply because that traffic will have made it to its destination substantially quicker without having the means to go anywhere any quicker when it gets there. I'm pleased to see that there's reference to a Skegness Relief Road, but could I ask that every effort is made in respect to that concept paper and the work around that to dovetail in with the discussions which I'm aware are already ongoing regarding the Skegness Gateway, because to my mind it would make a lot more sense to do one junction and to do it well to serve both purposes, rather than if we miss the bus on this occasion, we'll have to do a junction of our own, starting from scratch, on a further outer orbit of Skegness, elongating the route and having all of those costs to find on the basis of that cost to benefit ratio, rather than possibly seizing the potential of doing some of it alongside a junction that we know with Skegness Gateway is going to need to be delivered anyway.
Yeah, as outlined within the report, the Skegness Relief Road concept is it's currently attracting a medium cost to benefit ratio, so we're not 100% certain whether we will be able to get that funding needed from people like the Department of Transport. But I will take it away and highlight to the team that there's the opportunity there to line up with the Skegness Gateway work, and I'll take that action away.
I mean, yeah, just very quickly, I think the cost-benefit ratio might head in the direction of being more beneficial if you can do it once and do it well.
Thank you. Do we have any further speakers? Seeing none. So thank you for questions and comments. This now concludes the discussion of this item. I move that the committee receives the report and is satisfied with the updates on the performance achieved in the quarter reported on, with assurances received in relation to tackling areas of low performance and with updates on major schemes received. I also ask that our comments from today's debate are captured and be passed on to the relevant officers and portfolio holders in support of their efforts in designing and delivering a valued service across the county. Does anyone dissent? If so, please indicate now. No, so thank you, that is agreed. Moving on to the next item, the committee work programme. This item is on pages 147 to 154 of the agenda pack. This item enables the committee to comment on the content of its work programme. The report will be presented by Chiara, our scrutiny officer. In terms of our actions, we are to review the work programme and highlight any additional scrutiny activity which could be included for consideration in the work programme. Over to you, Chiara.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Chiara Chattiano, Scrutiny Officer designated for this committee. I would like to begin with a reminder to all members of the Highways and Transport Scrutiny Committee that the work programme is a living document that is being reviewed at each meeting of the committee to ensure that its contents are still relevant and will continue to add value to the work of the Council and partners. Members taking ownership of your own works for the year are encouraged to bring forward important items of community interest to the committee, whilst also recognising that not all items will be taken up depending on available resource and relevance. Moving on, in our next meeting on the 24th of April 2023, the agenda as has been developed to date will include the Anglian Water Street Works Performance Improvements Report, the Lincolnshire Traffic Management Working Group Outcomes, and the Transport Q3 Performance Report. And this concludes my update to you, and I welcome any comments and questions or suggestions, both here and offline, on potential future topics for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? No, thank you. I move that we note the report and approve the existing work programme as detailed in pages 147 to 154. Does anyone dissent? No, thank you very much. That is agreed. That now concludes the business of the meeting. Thank you everyone for your attendance. Thank you.